And then when I taught them, they were just blown away with all this information of, okay, now we talked a little bit about nudges, about biases, set size, default options, and so on. And so I kept talking, and they were really like, all this information is out there? Like, yes. And it's not even very new.
Yeah. No, that's an experience I've had multiple times now. That's I think me and many scientists think that, what we know is, well, everybody must know this, but the basic stuff, not the detailed mechanism. But
no, that's also what I kept thinking, and it's just not right.
Time and time again, I've given general audience talks, and to intelligent audiences, and also sometimes to audiences in a specific domain. So I've talked to like insurance companies about risk, and I would go in thinking, I'm not going to be able to tell an insurance company anything about risk. I mean, that's their principal business is understanding risk.
In theory.
And I mean, maybe that's true at an institution level, but at an individual level, I mean, I've given talks, which is very basic psychology and neuroscience of risk. And people have been really like, we'd no idea about that. And I recently had an environmental conference and talked about some very basic psychological principles to a very well-educated and accomplished audience, and it was all completely new to them. So I think scientists have done quite a bad job outside some of the popular science books. Have done quite a bad job about getting out the message of these are pretty foundational principles.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about every edge case and every new finding, but we know basically, we know a lot about how the decision process works. And I think we've done a poor job of making that available to people who could use the information. So for me, as I said, I'm interested in policy and how policy decisions can be better informed. And that's, I think, an area that we need to do much, much better in.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I just think that we know a lot about how people make choices, and often policy is about helping people make better choices for them / their country, their environment, and so on. And the knowledge that we have usually isn't present in these policies. And often policies are dominated by economists who've studied decision making, but from quite a different perspective. This idea of optimal decision making, right? The people who would
the rational agent
take any amount of money offered to them in an ultimatum game, because $1 is always better than $0.
Right.
And that's the kind of the model, the rational model is used as kind of, this is how people will decide if we give a policy to them. Often it's in the area of incentives, where that's the economists, I'd say, primary tool is we'll incentivize people to do something, right? And sometimes that works. So we can charge money for a plastic bag at the supermarket, and people will use less plastic bags. That can work quite well.
Sorry for interrupting you, but just if I understand correctly, when it comes to incentives, I mean, there's not only monetary incentive, right?
Yeah, no.
But that's what they mostly use.
They typically use financial monetary incentives, right? But
there's also like ethical and moral and social incentives. I mean,
that's one area of research that we're very interested in at the moment, the social incentives. So can you incentivize and promote good behavior using social motivations? And you can. And, if everyone who recycled got a gold star, right, that would have an effect. We've done some experiments demonstrating that. So that's an example, I think, of where neuroeconomics can make a decision. Neuroscience can have a role to play in understanding kind of behavior better and trying to, I don't want to use the word nudge, but at least alter behavior in a way that's kind of for the greater good. And so that's a direction we're taking in my lab. Recently, we're interested in questions of inequality and poverty and environmental sustainable behavior. And so how can we use what we've learned, not just from us, but from the field, to kind of better inform? And that turns out to be difficult, because you have to, maybe similar to the professionals you mentioned in industry, they're often not aware of these findings. So you have to somehow get access to them. You have to make the findings compelling and understandable. With the risk of that you simplify down to a unacceptable degree. So it's a difficult or it's a challenging road to take, but I think it's one that's really important.
I totally agree with you. And to my surprise, I constantly thought that we need to, so from the scientist's perspective, when we communicate something, we need to, in again, air quotes, dumb it down or simplify it. And then running the risk of, okay, it's not one, it cannot make any sense anymore if you do that too far, or it's actually not accurate anymore. Either way is not great. But I started the more I was talking to people in industry, they actually didn't want this at all. Mm-hmm. I thought that's what they were demanding, but actually it wasn't. They wanted to know, maybe not the details, the technicalities from the scientist's perspective, but just enough so they can grasp it. They didn't mind if it's complex. Yeah. They actually liked that. So just from my experience, I would say it's actually, again, some media outlet in between that says, oh no, you have to make this short and snappy. People have less time. Yeah. This needs to be a 1 minute read. How much do you learn in 1 minute? Nothing. Yeah. Nothing.
No, I think that's a good insight, that I think people aren't afraid of complexity. I mean, especially when you're talking about human behavior, I think if you come up with some glib one-liner about how, we can get people to do X by doing Y, it's also implausible, right? We're not quite that simple. So I think it's a good suggestion to not necessarily remove all complexity. I think it has to be compelling. I think as scientists, the other disadvantage maybe we have as scientists, that we're very reluctant to state anything with any degree of certainty, because, well, we know that it's impossible to prove things. So it's very hard to get a scientist to stand up and say, I am sure that if you do this other thing will happen, right? It's always couched in some degree of likelihood or probability, which is what we're trained to do. And, that's often not what a policymaker does not want to hear.
That's true.
They want to hear, okay, I want people to recycle. Tell me what I need to do to get them to do that. Yeah. And I think as scientists, maybe we have to be willing to, put our money where our mouth is a little bit and say, okay, here's a policy recommendation that you should carry out, and we believe it will have the best chance of achieving this outcome, as opposed to being saying just, well, here's the data, we don't know. That's not.
See you later.
Yeah, I mean, economists are quite good at being sure of themselves and sure of their models, and maybe we need to take a leaf out of their book too.